So this is Wanderer Breakdown Part 2, the lyrics. The story of the song is told in the form of a classic tragedy, and at a certain point of the song I actually reference the Greek myth of King Sisyphus. The main character of the story is a wanderer who's decided that he's reached the point where his life has gone on for too long, and he's basically seen everything there is to see. So he decides to take his life into his own hands, quite literally. But here, in an ironic twist, instead of finding peaceful nothing in death, it turns out that the afterlife exists in this world, so he ends up as a spirit, basically condemned to wander the world forever in a purgatory-like state. He attributes this to having committed suicide and destroying his soul, so like the man he was before in life, he travels across the world, just collecting the various fragments of his soul, with the hope that he can put it back together and finally move on. He eventually does gather everything, but the soul is so destroyed, disfigured, that he can't put it back together. He gives up and basically accepts that wandering is all there is. So to the actual lyrics themselves, there's a lot of head rhyme, internal rhyme going along, as with most of the songs on this demo. Basically, the verses are organized into 3-line pairs that are written in parallel with one of each other. Most of it should be obvious, so I'm not really going to point this out. I'll focus on some of the references and the more subtle meanings. So the first verse is following. The withered body of an old lonely wanderer, weary from the trials that he's faced. His weathered face gazes at the sky as he wonders, weary of this life he contemplates. This was basically the template that I started at. These were the lyrics that I wrote at the very beginning, and the rest of the song, the story, came out from here. And really these lines are just the setup as to what the characters, the motivation as to what happens in the rest of the story. The next verse, lost the key to the gate of dreams, enduring restless nights, seeking release. This is a reference to the story The Silver Key by Lovecraft. I think the opening line to that song is, when Randolph Carter reached adulthood, he lost the key to the gate of dreams. And the whole story is focused on this guy going back to his past and revisiting his youth and sort of discovering the way back to the dream world. And I think this song is that story is sort of a setup to the following story called The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, which is basically my favorite Lovecraft story. And this is just a reference to all that. The piece after that, longing for peace, to rest eternally, entomb his dreary spirit behind the wall of sleep. And that phrase, behind the wall of sleep, again is a reference to another Lovecraft story, Beyond the Wall of Sleep, which I think is a Black Sabbath song. So the piece after that, cleanse his eyes in preparation for the rite, knowing this final act he could not repent. Curse the sky, disregarding wrong from right, gnawing at the doors of death, preceding sans regret. So he basically decides he's going to pass on by committing suicide, regardless of its state as a sin or not. He's going to go through with it. The next line, the final line of this opening section, severing the bonds, separating from the core, but the way before rejected his presence and cast him aside, forever bound, determined to pass he vowed, to recover his soul, restoring the essence, and reach the other side. So this is basically just what I've said before. He commits suicide, and in the process of passing, his spirit leaves his body, but it doesn't actually go anywhere. It's still on the world itself, and he attributes this to having destroyed his soul in the act of suicide. So he decides he's going to go and travel the earth and recollect the pieces of his soul. And that's what's going on in the clean section. So the lyrics here, wandering again across the barren wastes, searching with haste for the key to undoing his fate. Slowly reclaim the pieces of undying flame, holding the fragmented soul, his apparition burning with hope. This is followed by the first guitar solo. Once the guitar solo is over, we're still in the same section, but the distorted guitars come in. Lyrics are, piece by piece, he tried to reassemble, but the infernal puzzle incurred the wanderer's wrath. And the word infernal here is obviously used to mean something that incites rage, or ignites rage more appropriately, but it's also a reference back to the idea that his soul is this undying flame, and it's literally an infernal puzzle. It's just a little bit of play on words. And the final verse of the section, Sisyphean task, in anger he cast it aside, cursed to wander confined, unknowing the purpose of life. So in the Greek story of King Sisyphus, I don't really remember what happens, the setup to the whole story. But basically at the very end, he's punished by the gods, probably Zeus, to roll a giant boulder up a hill. And when it gets to the top of the hill, either it rolls backwards before he reaches the top, or when he reaches the top, it tips over and rolls down the other side, and he has to go around and he has to pick it back up again. So basically the whole idea is that this is sort of it's a lost cause. His soul cannot be put back together again, so he accepts that his fate is to just remain in the world and wander for the rest of eternity. And we get to the final lines, which are a throwback to the opening line of the song. It's basically a parallel to that. The withered body of an old lonely wanderer, fatality's irony, lifeless yet alive. His weathered face gazes at the sky as he wonders the eternal futility of the afterlife. And that just basically is a summary of everything I've just given before. And that's the story of the Wanderer. This is an ironic tale of someone who wants peace and death, but he doesn't get it. My goal here was to really take this fantastical idea of the afterlife that's posed by religion and paint it as not so great of a thing. It's basically the same thing as life itself, but infinite and slightly more ethereal. I think the song can be interpreted as a cautionary tale against suicide. It points to suicide as the reason why the wanderer can't pass, and I think this might actually have been my initial motivation for writing the song. At the time, the soul was supposed to be this tangible key to a tangible gate that could be opened, and I think he may have been able to put it together and have a happy ending, but this is black metal, so it ended up being the opposite of that. Just bad luck. My current interpretation is that the key and the gate are just metaphorical things. This is the nature of death and the afterlife. The wanderer thinks suicide is the reason he can't move on, but he's never been painted as an omniscient being. He doesn't really know. Overall, I really like the story itself. The lyrics were kind of rushed. I had a hard time writing them because they were a little bit more explicit rather than abstract like the other ones. As I've always mentioned, I've always had trouble telling explicit stories where events precede each other. In the end, the final result's not bad. I do think the music carries the song a little bit more than the lyrics, which is generally not what I prefer, but this is a good song.